All right, scholars, so jumping into a new unit, we're going to be discussing the Western expansion of the United States. For your do now, you're going to answer one question. It's think about a time you wanted something that belonged to someone else. What did you do to get what you wanted? Try to keep in mind what method you used and what worked and what didn't. And if it did work, how did the other person feel when you got what they had? So go ahead and pause the video at this point and complete your do now question. So as we start a new unit, we always want to go over what our essential questions are going to be for this unit. So for the overall unit, we're going to be answering the question, were the expanded territories and the westward movement of settlers harmful or helpful to the United States? The question we're going to be addressing today is, was the United States justified in an expansion to the west? And again, expansion just means to get bigger or become larger, and we'll talk about what justified means in a moment. So our lesson objective today is as follows. Students will be able to hypothesize if the United States was justified in its expansion to the west by interpreting information presented in images and the text. How we're going to get there. First, we're going to learn important background information about this time in history. Then we'll look at a map showing the ways the United States acquired more land. And there's actually quite a few maps today. And then we're going to read the Chapter 16 introduction and use the text and maps to determine if the United States was right or justified in expanding the West. So for our first activity, we're actually going to be able to play around with an interactive map. But before we jump into that, I want to make sure that we're very clear on what today's question is. It asks, was the United States justified in its expansion to the west? We again know that expansion means to become larger or get bigger, right? But we've never really talked about justification or justified before. And that word just means that something is done for the right reasons. So when you're reading through today's essential question, what you want to think of is, was the United States trying to make its territory bigger in the West for the right reasons, or were they doing it for some other reason? So at this point, I'm going to ask you to pause your video and go over to the interactive map activity. It's found in Google Classroom under the Unit 6 resources. So go ahead and pause this video at this point and travel over to that interactive map. Follow the directions that are given with the resource, but also feel free to play around and, change the settings and look at the different geologic features, present day states, see the differences in Native American lands, how trail routes form, and all of those things. So go ahead and take some time and play around on that map, and we'll probably spend the majority of our class time doing that as well. So go ahead and pause the video at this point and answer the questions that are on your Google Form worksheet that correspond to this interactive map activity. So moving into another map, all right, this one's a little bit different because it's going to show the change over time without you having to really mess with it. So I'll let this run for a little while and you can kind of pause it and skip through it as necessary. But the questions I want you to keep in mind as you're looking at this map as it changes is, what happened to the amount of American Indian land, which is shown in green, over time, right? How does it change over time? Is it getting bigger? Is it getting smaller? How is the change in American Indian land related to the United States expansion, right? How is this change in their territory connect to the fact that the United States is becoming larger? And then, ultimately, from what you've seen now with looking at this map, as well as keeping in mind your interactive map activity that we just did, was the United States justified in moving west? Why or why not? Make sure you answer the questions that are on your Google Form worksheet. And I'm going to let this play for a little while so you can watch over the map. Pay special attention to the dates that are in the upper right-hand corner. So moving into our text, there's a couple of sections that we'll be addressing today, and this is the first. Manifest Destiny and Settling the West. How did the expansion of the United States affect people inside and outside the country? Introduction. In Chapter 15, you learned how leaders of the young nation added the Bill of Rights to the Constitution to protect the rights and freedoms of Americans. At that time, the United States stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. In this chapter, you will read about how the United States spread west across North America by taking control of territories or large regions of land. In the 1800s, the lands west of the Mississippi River were claimed by several nations. Many Americans wanted these lands. Some people believed that it was their natural right to take these territories for the United States. They said that expanding westward was the nation's fate. This concept is known as manifest destiny, and we'll talk about that more over the course of the unit. So I want you to look over this text again on your own and make sure you can answer the question, what did the United States look like in the 1800s? So what that means is, how much land did the United States take up? What was the territory that they actually had control over? Look for the specific example given in the text and make sure that you answer the question in your Google Form worksheet. Feel free to pause the video at this time to complete that. All right, our second section of text is as follows. American leaders used a variety of methods to annex or add territory to the United States. Sometimes they bought land. Sometimes they made agreements with other countries for land. One time, the United States was able to add land after fighting a war. Many Americans thought that expanding the United States was good for the country, but as you will see, it was not good for everyone. The map to the right shows the United States acquisitions, or lands gained, between 1783 and 1853. As you read this chapter, look back at this map. How did the United States gain control of each territory? What happened to the people who already lived there? So at this time, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and make sure you can answer these questions. How did the United States acquire more land? Who might the text be referring to when it says, it was not good for everyone? In order to best answer that question, you can go ahead and look at the map and put your finger on the place where land was bought, and also put your finger on a place where you think that it may have been acquired by war. And we'll clarify this as we continue in the unit. So you're just going to continue to make a hypothesis when you're looking over this map. So at this point, go ahead and feel free to pause the video and complete the questions associated with this text and the map in your Google Form worksheet. All right, so with finalizing those questions on your Google Form worksheet with the previous text, you should be able to about wrap up this lesson for today. We will continue to discuss these concepts and themes at length over the course of our Zoom meetings and also just as we continue with our lessons. If you don't feel 100% comfortable with what we covered today, don't worry. This is just the introduction, and we will clarify more of these terms and ideas as we continue. So again, don't panic. And speaking of terms that we need to probably be familiar with, these are the vocabulary terms that you're going to be adding to your repertoire or to what you already learned so far this year in social studies. You've learned a lot of new terms, and these ones are specifically very, very important as we continue through this unit. The terms are territory, annex, acquisition, manifest destiny, reservation, expedition, boundary, and cede. So when we're looking at these terms, you're going to obviously think that some of them are familiar. We talked about quite a few of them today. So they will get more simple as you go on and you'll get more used to them. Please make sure that you look over the vocabulary assignment in Google Classroom and make sure that that's completed by the end of this first week. If you don't have the vocabulary terms completed with the definitions, it's just going to be harder for you to continue on with the lessons. So make sure that's done by the end of the week. Also, you will have some of these words on your quiz, so make sure that you're following those directions and finishing the vocabulary. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and we'll be continuing this discussion in our Zoom meeting. And I'll see you there.